All right, as our panelists are getting settled in, we just want to thank you again for joining us for this 2022 State of Homelessness Conference and Luncheon. So welcome back. Everybody? Okay. Our next session is a panel discussion that will shed light on how different systems and sectors are breaking out of their silos and working together to end homelessness. Our moderator will be Marc Eichenbaum, Special Assistant to Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner for Homeless Initiatives. Marc is a licensed attorney who specializes in public policy and strategic communications. Please welcome Marc. Hi, Marc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually. All righty. So, before we begin, I was speaking with the mayor earlier this week, and he really wanted me to convey one message. And that is, so often when we hear the word first responder, society thinks of, or they're referring to police and fire. But the mayor really looks as the folks who are working for our homeless agencies are first responders too. And the pandemic only increased the definition to really include frontline workers such as healthcare workers. But those working in our homeless system are also frontline workers. And so if you personally or if your staff did, please tell them thank you. Thank you for still doing outreach, housing navigation, keeping the shelters open, all during the pandemic. The mayor and the city really appreciates theirs as well as their family sacrifices. So thank you to all of our frontline first responders within our homeless agencies. Alrighty, so to set the stage here, there's lots of folks here that are already really familiar with the way home and the system transformation that has happened since 2012, but we understand there are some here that aren't. So a quick primer, and that is back in 2011, the mayor at the time worked with the stakeholders to say, we're spending tens of millions of dollars on homelessness, we're getting anecdotal stories of success, but we're not moving the needle. And we're managing the issue, but we're not solving it, and we need to do something different. And so the community came together, many folks in this room came together and said, we need to start working on creating a collaborative system, and we need to embrace the best practices, data proven, of housing. And so that started it off in 2012. I know Melody Barr knows the housing, the Veterans Initiative started. We first tried pilot programs with that, and they were really successful. And folks knew if we just started working together, collaborating together at a high level, using best practices, we could actually move the needle. And it has. And you heard the stats earlier. Since 2011, a 64% reduction in overall homelessness, major reductions in unsheltered homelessness, reductions even in our sheltered homelessness, and it's been huge. And we've gotten there by really working together. So that's the theme of today, is how we have gotten here by collaborating, and where do we go from now? So we were going to have a starting lineup for all of our panelists. Unfortunately, the hotel said no to smoke machines and my pyrotechnics. So unfortunately, the way we're going to do this is I'm going to start with a question. And then before you each provide your answers, I'm going to say a couple of words about you. Everybody here is a program. I am not going to give you the full bios. We don't have enough time. So, but for those that don't, I'll make sure to say a couple words so you know why these four individuals are so important, why they're up here today. So to start with, the first question is going to be, each of you represent different systems and different sectors. How has your system collaborated with the homeless system, and why? So Barbie, you're going to be first up. For those that don't know Barbie Burchare, she's amazing. She's been in the domestic violence and sexual violence fields for over 26 years. She's an expert in more things than I can say. She's currently serving as the executive director of the Harris County Domestic Coordinating Council, and she's also the chair of our steering committee for the Continuum of Care, which is over the way home. So Barbie, you're going to first start off. How does the domestic violence system coordinate with the homeless system, and why is that important for you?
Thank you, Marc. I'll try to be brief because I could talk about this for a long time. The coordinating Planning Council, and along with at the time that Mark was mentioning, around 2012, began exploring coordinated access because of VAWA legislation and issues related to the significant confidentiality needs of those who are fleeing domestic violence. Entering into an HMIS system is not possible, nor is it safe. So the providers came together and started exploring how to set up a separate but similar system. So we developed the one door for domestic violence coordinated access system. And that system now serves as a parallel system to the HMIS system. There's not a way for them to talk to each other yet, but we're working towards that. And the way that we coordinate and collaborate is domestic violence families make up a significant and majority of families who are part of those being served by our homeless systems response dollars. We only have a limited number of domestic violence specific housing. So the need to have access on both sides is imperative. Families that never reach a domestic violence provider are going to come into the homeless service provider system for help, and yet need safety planning and risk assessment and advocacy and the very specialized supportive services that our domestic violence experts are able to provide. So we collaborate in that way. So we're providing those services to that part of the system. And then we are also serving the highest risk, the most vulnerable in need on the domestic violence side with that housing.
Thank you, Barbie. All righty, Mr. Bob Urie, 38 years as a president and CEO of the Central Houston and the Downtown Management District, an architect, an urban planner, affectionately known as the mayor of downtown Houston. And even Mayor Turner would say that. But Bob has been, since the beginning, since the conception of The Way Home, really has the pulse of the business community and knows the private sector better than anybody. Bob, why is it important for the private sector and the business community to work with the homeless system?
Thank you, Mark. First of all, let me just say something right now that there's a new mayor of downtown. I want to make that very clear to everybody. I am retired now, and I just want to make sure that we all got that straight. You know, for the business role, and you just said it, 38 years, it dates way back, I think almost to the same age as the coalition, if I remember right. I can't remember the exact date the coalition was founded, but yeah, and we were formed in '83 too. So it's really the same thing. I think our role has really been, when you look at the redevelopment of downtown, one of the issues that most downtowns in America face is really the presence of homeless and street people in their downtowns. It's the center of the city. Frankly, they're safe. It's a place that people can be. It's service rich, and there's many reasons why that there's a higher population there. As a result, if you're really in the role of helping to redevelop downtown and make a place that people come, it's economically thriving and all that, we really must address the issues that face homeless individuals. And so we know that there's an economic interest for us, but there's also an economic interest for the community in terms of really providing housing and services and helping people to be in a stable situation. We know for the community that's of economic benefit as well. The work we've done over time really has been all over the place, but I think a lot of it has been planning and research, really making it more data-driven, and this goes way back in time, continued advocacy all the way along, the fundraising involved in one way or another. And the way I'll look at that is sort of just-in-time funding. If we really are anxious to move fast in making this happen, we've really got to sit down and figure out what's the quickest way that we can put resources behind the ideas to move it forward. And we all know that sometimes it just takes forever to be able to, it feels like it takes forever to be able to find the funds to do what we need to do. Done a lot of work in sort of system mapping and facilitation over time to help sort of get to where we are. And then as we moved into the way home, I think one of the things we tried to do was help bring leaders in the community together, from the faith community, business community, the foundations, and try to do everything we could to help barrier bust, to really move the way home forward and really make progress in moving forward. And then just most recently, really it started right before COVID, is beginning to look at a much more higher level at where can we collaborate even better and more, sort of cross systems. And so we've had a series of ongoing leadership meetings to just keep trying to work these new collaborations that help us get to where we're even more effective in being able to house homeless and meet the needs that individuals have who are facing that issue.
About that cross-system engagement work is being enabled from the private sector. And I think why that's so important, why that's a big theme today, is that another theme you've heard a lot is that we're resource poor here. City side, relatively, we're low tax and we operate with a revenue cap. And when it comes to funding for homelessness, we've squeezed that orange dry. So the problem is when you don't have more funding, how can you increase impact without funding? You have to integrate with other systems and leverage each other. And I think that's what's happening today, is we're leveraging and working with each one of these systems in lieu of having more funding to try to increase impact. And the private sector has been amazing. And thank you for all your work. With that, Mike Nichols, former state representative in Georgia. He was a general counsel for a Fortune 500 company. He's was COO for another major local corporation. He served as interim CEO for the Houston Parks Board. And we've been lucky enough for the past 3-4 years to have him as president CEO of the Coalition for the Homeless of Houston and Harris County. Mike, tell us why and what you've seen coming from the outside originally about the importance of system integration between the homeless system and others out there.
I'm a believer in good government. I'm a believer that philanthropy cannot mask bad government. It should not mask bad government. What I've seen in the homeless response system is a model for many, many other systems. And that's when you have collaboration between public funders, business, philanthropy, nonprofits, and other stakeholders. You can do great things. And housing 7,000 people this year is a good example of those great things. The coalition is the lead agency for the COC, the Continuum of Care. That steering committee represents many, many different groups. We are very proud that Bob Urie is not completely retired because he's going to be a new member of the COC steering committee, and thank you very much. But the success in Houston and Harris County has been this collaboration, this belief that yes, there are barriers, and yes, we can get through those barriers. The lead agency is the catalyst that stirs it up. It's been my honor to sit with Bob and Wayne and other folks as they develop the R3 Center for our community. It's my honor to sit with Bob and Wayne and other folks as we develop ways that criminal justice system can better positively impact the homeless response system. So it is an honor, Mark, to be part of this collaboration, but I do see it as a model for many, many other social successes.
Thank you, Mike. You mentioned Wayne, Mr. Wayne Young, a true national leader in the behavioral health world. All you need to know is that we were lucky enough to get Wayne from Fort Worth, where he now is serving as a CEO of the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD, the designated state local mental health authority here that's serving over 80,000 clients a year. Wayne, the homeless system and the mental health system didn't always used to work together. It's definitely changed, and there's still more work to be done. Why did you feel that it was important for that connection to be made?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I think we should start off acknowledging that Bob is terrible at retirement. He is clearly a retirement failure, and I'm assuming he's going to show up with a full-time job any minute now.
Real quick, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do. Is your mic on? Are we getting?
I'll move it a little closer and see if maybe that helps.
Perfect. Thank you.
It doesn't adjust, so I'll just try and lean down here. So I think we've already heard from several of our speakers today, great statistics around the prevalence of mental health, the disproportionality of mental health being represented in the homeless population, the population that many of these organizations serve. And interestingly enough, the examples that were given were for diagnosis around schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, and PTSD, which also happens to be the 4 primary diagnoses that we see in our system. So there is this huge overlap, both conceptually as well as in reality in our community. And it's interesting to me. So this last year, we spent $37.6 million in providing care to people who were homeless. And 2 years ago, it was like 26 million. So it's gone up a lot, but that's still a lot. Even at 26 million was a lot. I think the challenge for us is a lot of our care delivery was done kind of in our lane and in our path. And I think we were there and present, but I don't think we tried to consider how we might leverage partnerships, opportunities to go in together to provide services in a similar platform or location. And so for me, and part of the calling is frankly, we received an invitation, right? Like Bob called and said, I'm having a meeting, will you come? And because he was the mayor of downtown, you say yes when he calls, right? And to watch that power of transformation happen as all of those providers and agencies came together was inspiring, right? And it is clear, as we've done in criminal justice systems and other settings, the integration of these systems of care and providers has got to happen in order to be able to maximally serve those that we're charged with serving, right? And as the safety net provider in our community, I feel an obligation and responsibility to be a good partner in that work.
You know, I want to pull the curtain away and be honest. We're in a friendly crowd here. When the homeless system first started having dialogues with the mental health system, there was some sausage being made, and we would say these people are too acute. It's your responsibility, and sometimes well, they're homeless. It's your responsibility. How did we go from that period, which was there's a little conflict or disagreements, to where we are today? Really working together. What do you think changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunity for us to sit down at the table and to work through those conversations and to do it with good intended people who are smart. And at the end of the day, I think it was clear that everyone at those tables were committed to the people that we were talking about, whether the perspective was it's your issue or my issue or whatever. And so when you get good intended people trying to work on a solution focused approach, I think good things come of it, right? And everybody kept showing up. And part of that was to Bob's leadership. Part of that was to Mike's leadership. I've seen many of those meetings come together and not bear fruit, right? And because of their commitment and continued focus on bringing the group together, the repetition and opportunity of that, I think ultimately created some strong alignment and people willing to put it aside, right? There's lots of conversation says, well, you haven't always been the partner maybe that we would have liked to have had, but you're here now, and a willingness to let some of that stuff go and just embrace wherever we are today as a community.
From the other panelists that were part of those meetings, what were some of your observations on how we got over that hump?
My observation, Mark, was that we had the people with the money, being the city and the county at that moment, willing to work together. And that's so important. And it takes a lot, because it's not just the political powers, it's also the bureaucratic powers. And once we had all of those groups saying, yes, we'll each put up some money, things begin to roll.
Yeah, and I'd say instead of us saying it's your responsibility, it's yours, we said it's ours. And then we said, even if we're not the mental health experts, how can we assist and how can we help? How can we support?
Mark, in my opinion, it sort of started on the wall. There's a diagram up there, and you look at it and you go, this is not one player. This is all the players in this diagram. Now let's go back and start working the pieces of it. And the truth is we're still working it. We're not done.
So Mike, you mentioned the county. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Martin and Leah Barton and Francisco and the others with the county that are here, because they're a tremendous equal partner, and we couldn't do any of this without them. So thank you guys. Barbie, I had mentioned that you serve as the chair of the Continuum of Care. What's it like to balance the interests of the domestic violence system with the greater good and the needs of the overall homeless response system?
I look at it as a great opportunity. It's real easy to stay siloed in our expertise areas and lose track of the big picture for the entire community. And in my seat as where I sit on the COC, having this tremendous opportunity to interface with all of the other disciplines that are represented, where everyone's kind of checking their ego at the door and checking their agenda at the door and saying, we're in this for the greater good. That's what makes it easier. I know you're going to ask us a question about collaboration, and collaboration being the theme of the day, but truly collaboration is hard work. It's truly hard work. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of resources, and then it takes more time. So, I mean, that's the reality. So working with people that have that base knowledge and understand that makes it easier.
Okay, well, you said collaboration. And
Yeah.
sometimes when I hear that word, I roll my eyes because it's overused. Everybody uses it. And it really means different things to different people. But when we say the word collaboration, what does that mean to you? So Barbie, you just said a little bit. Bob, what, in the context of the homeless system, what does collaboration mean?
My sense is it's really beginning to balance your focus on the mission for what you're responsible for. If I'm the head of one of the pieces of the system, but really also really beginning to fully understand and learn what the other siloed entities are, or that might have the possibility of being silos. But it only works when we recognize there's a system, and we can't really make the progress we want to make unless we have everybody participating. So that means I'm probably giving a little on my silo, and I'm really letting others really kind of help, because we know together that we can do more and we can see it. Metrics plays into that, because if you can measure progress, it makes you want to stick with it, and it's harder to kind of go off your own direction. I think a lot of it also depends, and as I've thought about it, on sort of the fiscal and just health and governance of the various entities that are involved in it. If any one of those entities is in let's say a weakened situation, it makes it much harder. That everybody has to be strong in this, and it's hard because it's a nonprofit world or public world. Funds are always hard to find, and so it's one of those things where we have to be considerate of that. And the truth of the matter is, we all should be advocating for more money for everything that we're doing at this point, because we need it.
Mike, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Collaboration has a very specific meaning to me in this circumstance. The LA Times had an article comparing Houston and LA, saying what LA could learn from Houston. And it described our system as having good organization, good scale, and pragmatism. And collaboration means to me, when people start looking at this bigger picture to make sure the scale is big enough that we can really make a change, to make sure it's organized in a way that you can make a change, and to be pragmatic. And that's what Bob was focusing on, because we're always looking at how can we help those individuals who are living on the street and living in this kind of desperate poverty. And I think that's what collaboration means to me, this focus on scale, organization, pragmatism.
We've gone around and we've said how your systems or sectors have and currently collaborate with the homeless system. But let's talk about the future right now. What does the future hold? Is there a certain project that's coming down the pipeline? Is there a certain area that's now being explored? But regarding system integration, where do you see the future going? And Wayne, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. We were naturally just going down, starting off with you.
Yeah, that's great. I've got sorry, I had to move it back. I felt like y'all could hear me breathe. I've got a great example, so I appreciate being the first one. It lets me get out there first and then not have to worry about being redundant. I think a lot of individuals in the room know about the respite rehab and reentry, or as Marc prefers to call it, the wellness and housing center. I think is his preferred vernacular. It's all the same place, right? And it's 108 beds serving people at the intersection of homelessness, criminal justice, and serious mental illness. And we're only fortunate enough to have that center because Marc and other county leaders leveraged their influence and actually helped us acquire that building, get the funds for it. And so we're able to operate. And now the project that's next in line, and that's a tremendous accomplishment in itself. There's communities that come almost every week to tour that site and think about how they might replicate that. And we're hoping shameless plug, we're hoping it goes to city council in June or July. But the intent is, and we think we've secured most of the funding for a 24-unit apartment complex on that same campus, so that you can literally enter that campus from unsheltered homeless, typically mentally ill without stability, all the way through to being housed in that same transition and in that same house, in that same campus. And all of that is in partnership, right? It's in partnership with organizations that I often don't understand. We speak different languages. I don't know the vernacular. I literally had to hire somebody to help me translate because we kept saying stuff and I was like, I don't know what that means. And so I had to find somebody that could help me with that. Most of you are probably quicker than I am and catch on faster. But so I think that is one example. We're with the city, we're partnering right now on non-law enforcement response teams. And a lot of those calls are going to be targeted towards individuals that are homeless because they haven't committed a crime. They just need a response group, right? And so we are soon to have 20 mental health response teams in our community to respond to 911 calls. Without that, there's many other law enforcement collaboration investments that the city's made. But there's lots of exciting things that are on the horizon around mental health and the homeless.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the Harris Center traditionally has not been involved in the housing piece. And you just said you're perhaps be doing apartments. How did you get there?
Very, very small. I'm still trying to figure that part out. But at my core, I believe that the people and remember, we serve a very specific population. We are a safety net system for people with very serious mental illness. And even in that scenario, most of the 80,000 people we serve can live happily in the community in a very traditional kind of environment and setting. But I think we've all seen the consequences of those few individuals who cannot, right? No matter what, at least they cannot for the foreseeable future. Maybe we can, with hope and recovery, get them to a place where they can, but in the next few years, that is going to be a transition to get them there. And so if, as the organization that's primarily responsible for our community's mental health, I feel like if that's the missing gap, then we've got to find some way to be a part of that solution.
Hard to do without housing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Barbie, what does the future hold with the collaboration between the homeless system and DV system?
Well, I want to start with saying this because we have adopted the mindset of collaboration and systems and not starting over, but using the knowledge that we've learned from one another and learning what using the metrics and the data to tell us the story to how to move forward. And then as our doctor folks presented earlier from the healthcare, crisis brings opportunity, and COVID did that for us. As a community, we saw all of the ARPA funds and the COVID relief funds come in, and it allowed us to get really creative with thinking about how do we meet the true needs. And for me, I've been in this community for 30 years, and a first happened. And that was our city and county partners with these emergency housing vouchers that were coming in. I think we somewhere around 11 to 1,200 housing vouchers. And these were permanent supportive housing solutions for up to 8 years for families. This is incredible. And our community said domestic violence is a crisis. It was pre-pandemic. It's even more now pandemic, and it's going to be post-pandemic because of what we know about disaster. Let's earmark those. Let's dedicate those to those families. And that's what happened. So 25 to 30% of those were earmarked directly for families fleeing domestic violence, our most vulnerable. So these are our families that are suffering with mental health challenges or physical challenges, most vulnerable from the horrible trauma of the violence. So they're at the highest risk for homicide. And those that just need additional supportive services in order to become and stay safer. So to me, that's the future, is telling the story about what happens for those families, because this service, this community said, this is important. And we've got to tell our state legislators, our local leaders, and our national leaders that this is what happened because you invested.
Sure. Bob, the work that the private sector has helped start, especially working between the homeless system and the mental health system. What's next on the horizon?
I think what's next on the horizon, and if you want me to kind of go there, is let's ask a question. How many people in the room here, raise your hands if you're involved in the law enforcement and criminal justice system? Okay, we've got one over here, one over here. Good. But I think that is a huge area, almost what we've seen here with mental health and housing and health, sort of that. I think the criminal justice system really is one area where it's very complex, but if you think about it, it plays a huge role in the homelessness. That it's very often the police, whichever force you're on, or sheriff, you're actually working as a frontline person with it, and then it sort of works from there. I think it's become more complicated, and it's the right thing with the federal court ruling on no, can't jail somebody that can't pay bond. And I totally agree with that, but it meant that we need a community response to that, because to some extent the jail system was providing shelter in many cases. And then I think as we get further into it, this issue of collaboration gets exponentially hard, working with just the number of different units in the geography of the region. So you have a Houston Police Department, you have the Harris County Sheriffs, you have constables, their own, each one of them sort of in their own little districts and precincts. And then you have from there, not only just the court system, but but then you have the municipal court system, you have justices of the peace, and you have all of that. And I think that is, I think you can begin to realize the complexity of that. And so as we sort of look forward, just like what we've been doing, it's really more a matter of engaging everybody, because they're part of the system too, and really opening a dialogue and understanding more about how it works. And let's see if we can really make this go together for the advantage of everybody here. And most importantly, especially to the individuals who are homeless.
Mike, I can see your wheels turning.
They are turning. My wife claims that I'm addicted to anxiety. I say I have optimal anxiety. And when I look at the future, one of the things I'm most anxious about is affordable housing. I think we are entering into a crisis, not only in the nation, but also for the first time in a long time in Houston and Harris County, in adequate affordable housing. So that's a big picture. How many people here are involved in being landlords? Tamara is, and folks at New Hope. But again, a little like the criminal justice teams here who are here, we are needing to focus on the needs of our landlords and what we can do to have this system better integrate itself with those needs and solve those problems. Affordable housing is the big picture, Mark, but we also need to work on making sure that there's an adequate amount of housing available for people coming out of the homeless system. It's, to me, our next big barrier that we have to work through.
A quick question for Mike and Wayne. The session before this was about advocacy. I think we're 288 days away from the legislature starting, but who's counting? The legislature can be a double-edged sword. This is your time. Quickly, what is one specific issue that you feel is going to be key to get past or to advocate for in the next session?
Okay, I'll go first. So I think I'd like to pick more than one, but I'll honor the question. I think for us, from the mental health perspective, I think it is trying to find opportunities for funding some probably non-traditional thoughts around stable housing, right? Maybe not a person living in a one-bedroom apartment with the traditional landlord, but maybe it is a staffed group home, right? Where some of these individuals that have some very serious mental illness and mental health needs can be in a safe place with some support. Recovery homes, substance use disorder housing. I think we've got to figure out how do we commit some funding for that in addition to the other priorities.
Mark, my team said I cannot say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm still a believer in advocating for Medicaid expansion. And I think it's the right thing to do and the fiscally responsible thing to do. But they also say you're 70 years old, Mike, and you are a dreamer. Well, that may be right. So in the event of that, I'm interested in other kinds of expansion, like 1115, funding like Wayne said for mental health, Those are things that we can take inch away on and make a big difference.
Bob, you might have something, but I feel that Barbie, I'd be remiss if I didn't get you an opportunity to do a plug for something that's important on the horizon at the legislature that needs to get passed.
Well, I totally agree with what Mike just said. Totally. Medicaid expansion directly impacts women with kiddos, right? It must happen here. I'm with you, Mike. I'm not giving up. We have to continue to fight for that. I think the other thing on the domestic violence realm in terms of legislation is supporting, enhancing, and bringing more dollars into our frontline shelter staff, shelter programs, advocacy programs. That money has to stay protected and it needs to increase. And the money earmarked towards prevention. I mean, if we're going to move the dial, if we're going to make any change here at all, we have to prevent this from happening. One of my mentors, Toby Myers, talks about draining the swamp. That's the key to prevention, drain the swamp. And for us, it's starting early with kiddos, very early, talking about what a healthy relationship means so that those families never end up homeless down the road, right?
Sure. So in Houston, Harris County, we have the mentality that there's no such things as challenges. There's just opportunities. Now, with that in mind, what are some opportunities down the road that we, as a homeless system and as partners of the homeless system, have to seize upon to be able to keep momentum going in the future? So what do you see as that big challenge? Oops, that's a bad word, or opportunity going forward that everybody in this room needs to be mindful of and be working on? Where do I start? Bob, you might. We'll start with you.
Let me take a shot at it. I've thought about it because of having a number of years of experience working with homelessness. Those of you that were here in 2005 when Houston helped the folks from Louisiana, New Orleans, be housed from Hurricane Katrina. I think there was a huge lesson that we all learned in the community, because I'll bet you around this room, there were, put hands up here, I bet you a bunch of people were all working on that in one way or another when this huge mass of people came. And Houston took them in. And if I remember correctly, in a period of about 4 to 5 months, we housed over roughly 150,000 people. You kind of look, I've always felt that was one of those things where it was driven by disaster. But it also, one of the byproducts of that was that it really kind of taught us that if we really put our mind to it, we could take on something that big. Because if somebody had come to us and said, Mark, can we do that? 150,000, and I think we'd all kind of say, really? How would we do that? We did it. And so it's interesting to me because in many ways, disasters have been unlocked. While they bring some real consequences and real cost, they've also brought resources, and they've also brought new ways that we get together and new ways we see things. And so when you really think about it, the community COVID housing program, disaster driven, really. And look at what we're able to do, and we were able to collectively in this room hustle to put together collaboratively to be able to really make the progress that's been made over the last couple of years now here. So I don't know how you prepare for a disaster coming in the future, but something says, and I've seen it said multiple times, it seems like the frequency of disasters have the potential to increase here on us. But in many ways, we need to continue to do what we've been doing, and that is really be responsive and resourceful and beginning to kind of work off of those to continue to advance what we're doing on a normal day when we, quote, don't have a disaster.
So between the floods, between the hurricanes,
Right.
between pandemics, I mean, we have a playbook, and we need to institutionalize that playbook because you're right. The future is looking like it's only going to be more crisis after crisis.
Right.
Mike, there's lots of crises out there. What do we need to be seizing upon?
I'd say the next crisis is not having a crisis. Let me give you an example. December 31st, 2024, all this COVID money begins drying up. The federal government's going to be tightening down no matter who's in office. And what we have to do here locally is determine how do we overcome that crisis of not having this inflow of money. So the preparation is right there. We have ideas as you work through the criminal justice. The healthcare system has to play a bigger role in housing. We have to solve those problems, but it is coming soon. And again, that's preparing for there's not being a crisis and the money has to come from somewhere else.
And I think you mentioned healthcare. I think that's a great system, the public healthcare system that's out there, besides the FQHCs that we work with, where there's not a ton of collaboration and there's really an opportunity there to leverage each other's resources. Wayne, opportunities in the future, challenges in the future we need to overcome?
Yeah, so I mean, remember, I come from a health system that's been, underfunded for decades, right? And a part of what we're seeing are some of the consequences of that too, right? I mean, this is a reality of having a system that was, shifted from an institutional to a community-based setting without the adequate resources to support that. However, I think our system, first of all, I don't think our system can solve the problems that we have today from a mental health perspective with the traditional approaches that we've done, right? We've got to try different stuff. And a part of that for me is figuring out how we better integrate our current mental health system into the existing providers where they want it. Like, healthcare for the homeless has a tremendous system. Avenue 360 does as well. They deliver great behavioral health services. There are some organizations where it doesn't work that way, or they can't, or they're not healthcare systems, and so they can't do that. And so how do we begin to integrate and leverage the existing investment in behavioral health into the community settings that are already there, so that we take care of the people and not, as we traditionally have done, wait for them to show up on our door.
Barbie?
I want to go back to something that was shared with us early this morning by the city council member, and that's the crisis that is developing from the fatigue of our frontline workers. And I'm seeing this across the board. Mike, I want to take a shameless moment here and praise your staff and your team at the coalition, because y'all haven't stopped, not for a moment. And then when I look at our domestic violence service providers, I know Emily's here from the Houston Area Women's Center, our largest domestic violence program in the city of Houston. Your staff didn't stop. Yes. That's a challenge. And as leaders, we must talk about this, and talk about this again, checking our egos, checking our individual, missions aside. Collectively, when you pull just all of these folks that are tired together, that are serving all of the folks that are being hurt and wounded and homeless and battered and abused, and we've got a crisis. We have got to address this.
Okay, so for those keeping score at their tables, we have, further leveraging resources. We got finding sustainable funding. We need a debrief after COVID so we can better prepare for the next crisis. And then we got to socialize. We got to talk. We got about the stress that our frontline staff is having, and we need to be really keen and cognizant of that so we can keep going forward in the future. All four of these needs are not the responsibility of just these four individuals. It's all of ours. And I think that's the dialogue that continues on. And I think those are really thoughtful answers, and I appreciate them. We've talked a lot. We've covered a lot. I think we're wrapping up here. If I was to give each of you 1 minute to say something that you feel is an important concept or theme or something that has gone unsaid, but you feel it's really important that you want to convey that to folks. So real quick, everybody gets a minute, starting with you, Wayne.
Oh my goodness.
Surprise.
Yeah, thank you for that.
No problem.
Or challenge or whatever.
Hot potato.
I appreciate it. I think it is to figure out how we continue to focus on the gains that we've made as a result of COVID, because a lot of positive things have come from it. Clearly it's a disaster, and none of us would wish it to happen this way. But there have been lots of needles moved because of this.
Try moving it closer. You're getting a little reverb.
Is
You
that
might
what
be
it
able
is?
to turn
Okay,
down the sound. if
Well,
you-
when I was down here before,
There.
it worked. So,
Perfect.
so I think it is trying to figure out how we continue some of those lessons learned, how we begin to continue to try and transform our systems so that they work to the benefit of the individuals we serve, as opposed to the institutional priorities that we might have.
I want to first echo Barbie. That was beautiful the way you said it. And it's truth. The folks on the front line need a big thank you. And the second thing I'd like to say in my 1 minute is please advocate for what you heard today. Advocate with your neighbors, your friends. The public does not understand what we're doing. They don't. So please talk to them. They want to talk about homelessness. It's really interesting to them, but please talk to them and then tell them to talk to the people who are in power.
Very simply put, I think what I would say is let's continue the collaboration. It's been so effective, whether we're in crisis or not.
And I think for me, it's listen. The word that just is echoing through my head is listen. You know, we heard our healthcare folks talk about the importance of doing focus groups. We thought it was this, but when we talked to people, no, that wasn't it at all. We must listen to those with lived experience to inform where we're going, because otherwise we're going in the wrong place. That's it.
Thank you. This was about collaboration. It was about collective impact. And I think the challenge to all of us today is to go back into our own organizations. How can we internally within our organizations even collaborate better? How can we collaborate better with external stakeholders within the homeless system? And then how can we be a part of the collaboration between the homeless system and other systems that are out there? Your thoughtful responses were insightful and provoking, and we really appreciate your time today. So please, a round of applause for our four panelists.
And for Marc. Thank you, Marc.
Yes, thank you so much, Marc Eichenbaum, for moderating this year's panel. Thank you so much, Barbie Burchare, Bob Eury, Mike Nichols, and Wayne Young. We are now going to take a break for lunch. So please enjoy your lunch, mingle with each other. We will start back at 11:45 with our keynote speaker, Jeff Oliver.